Well, welcome everyone to our Planning Commission meeting tonight. Thankfully we have a quorum. I understand a few folks will be running late, but we'll go ahead and get started. Let's begin with a Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We've asked Commissioner Daly to give us a thought or prayer to begin our meeting tonight. Commissioner?
All right, so I decided I'm going to take a slightly different approach to the thought or prayer, and I came across this recently, and this is some planning that was happening in this county 60 years ago, almost exactly 60 years ago. So this is an article from the Davis County Clipper from September 20th, 1957. Civic leaders see proposed road. And basically what it's talking about is that the community leaders, city and county leaders had met on the east side of the cemetery in Centerville, got piled into Jeeps, and they headed up the mountain to look and see, or to kind of experience a proposed road that was going to follow roughly the Bonneville shoreline all the way around Bountiful and around the mountain south of Ensign Peak, and then drop in to Salt Lake behind the Capitol. And it was proposed to go from Farmington through Centerville all the way up. So it would have been up there pretty high and all along the way. So in the end, it was kind of on the table, it looks like, for about 10 or so years through the mid-60s. And then the state never really supported it, and the state never funded it, and the county was counting on the state to throw some money into it. But it never happened. It just kind of disappeared. Bountiful Boulevard eventually kind of took part of that through Bountiful, but it never materialized north of that. But I just thought it was interesting, some of the planning that had happened. The county spent a lot of time and money on it, actually, to survey it and to plan it all out. So just interesting to see what had happened 60 years ago and never really materialized. I'm kind of glad that it didn't, but whatever. Anyway, so it was just an interesting thought to see what was happening around here that long ago. And I'll offer a quick prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for the opportunity we have to gather together to discuss the important issues of the city and to discuss the ways to make the city that we live in a great place to live in. And we ask Thee to bless that we can work together and to find the right solution that will solve the problems and meet the needs. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Commissioner. We'll move to item number 1 on our business agenda tonight. This has been scheduled for a public hearing. This is consideration of proposed zoning text amendments to CZC 12.42 regarding various amendments to development standards within the Hillside Overlay Zone related to lot standards and measurements. And the applicant on this is Chad Morris. Welcome, Chad. Nice to see you again. And we'll turn the time to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Commission, as you indicated, this is a petition to amend our zoning code in this case, the Hillside Overlay. Mr. Morris owns a piece of property, or is developing a piece of property that you've seen in a couple of meetings, or last meeting. No, it was a couple meetings ago. For conceptual subdivision. You see the property that he's looking to develop on this corner of Main Street, 2028 or 2026, something like that, North Main. And as you can see on the map, it's a residential low zone, but if you see the crosshatch lines going across, if you zoom back out, there's an area of crosshatching along the east side of Main Street. And that crosshatch represents the Hillside Overlay Zone. The Hillside Overlay Zone is a carryover from some time ago. We have a 2003 update to the zoning code. It did not add a new chapter on sensitive lands. It created that chapter in reserve, but it did not do away with the previous version of a sensitive overlay called the Hillside. And so to this date, the Hillside remains in place. It has not been updated as anticipated in 2003. And so we have a number of things that we probably need to look at beside the petition tonight. As Mr. Morris was looking at the property of the Hillside Overlay, or the zoning for RL allows a 60-foot minimum lot width minute, requires it. The Hillside Overlay, though, can add to the element depending on the slope. In the case of the piece of property, it's ranging just slightly at 10 or just above 10% grade, and up to, I think it's less than 20, if I recall right.
Less than 15.
Less than 15. So it's in this middle category. We split it out up to 10, 10 to 20, 20 above, and we do not allow development on 30% slopes. What's interesting about the hillside is once you achieve a slope area above 10%, it now circumvents or trumps the base zoning and kicks it to all lots have to have 100 feet of frontage. So it doesn't categorize beyond that. It just says once you're above 10%, your lot widths jump from 60 feet to 100 feet. And I think that's the part that they're looking at to change. So Mr. Morris has taken a step back. He's you've reviewed the conceptual. He has to figure out a way to comply with the hillside standards. And the attempt at this point in time is to approach the city to amend the hillside standard of that 100 feet. If you look at his petition, you do see that he, lack of better terms, creates an incremental increase and just every time you achieve above 1% of 10%, so if you achieved 11, you move it 2 feet, so it'd be 62 feet. Move it to 12, 64 feet. And you see that language that he's proposed in his petition to the city. This is submitted to the Development Review Committee. They're always charged with initially looking at the applications and evaluating the merits of the petition and making recommendations to you as a group, as well as the planning staff will occasionally look at some planning issues and kick those in as part of our review of any petition. In the case of the Development Review Committee, consisting of various city staff, myself, our city attorney, public works director, engineer, fire department, and others can participate even on invite into that group. The city engineer was where the DRC looked to for some guidance, because this is really related to slope stability and engineering issues that are associated with it. Ultimately, the DRC found that there's room for looking at some changes to the hillside. This one size fits all, as I think the petitioner puts it, is once you're above 10, it automatically jumps to 100 feet. The concern the DRC discussed, and I've got some pictures in your report that we brought up in discussion. This is a picture of Ford Canyon listed up here, and it's also in your report. Ford Canyon is technically in the hillside, but back when it was submitted, and this was years ago, it was exempted from the hillside ordinance. So this is not a direct apples and apples comparison, but this is a substantial subdivision that would have been under the hillside review. And what we have noticed, you see the house to the west or the left side of the screen. That's actually an owner that's purchased 2 of the lots of Ford Canyon. So they went ahead and bought 2 lots and developed a property on the 2 lots. The 2 eastern homes on the picture are to the right. Those are individual lots in Ford Canyon. It's ranging from about 127 or so feet, 135 feet of lot width in the Ford Canyon. So it's not down to the 100, it's a little bit larger. The concern the DRC, because we've had to look at various lots in the hillside and stabilization, is we still implemented much of the parameters when we went through the building permit process for these homes. So cuts and fills are less than the 8 feet, or the retaining part's less than 8 feet. You can cut 10 feet and fill 10 feet. You just can't retain more than 8 feet. And if you'll notice, these are deep lots and you have varied retaining systems. And that's where we think there's a weak point in the hillside overlay, is it limits your cut and fill, but it doesn't limit how many cuts and fills. But it does go in further and say, but we don't want you to do extensive cuts and fills for rear yard areas to flatten out. So you have this tension that people can do multiple cuts and fills with 8-foot increments. And that's what you're seeing, these 8-foot increments. And to carry the load weights, they'll go up 8 feet, move it back half the distance, which is 4 feet, build another 8-foot wall, move it 4 feet, build another 8-foot wall. And you have this repetitive pattern going on these hillside lots. And so that's a struggle, is that it's almost as if the larger the lot, and looking at the market for these lots, people have sufficient funds to spend on retaining systems. These are expensive retaining systems. And so that's a weak point, is that there's this ability to build these retaining systems financially, preserve the hillside, this tension that goes on, and it's these large lots that you get this multiple retaining system occurring on. So we think jumping to the large lot, trying to preserve slopes, is not really happening. That's not really the spirit and intent that's going on. The other thing we do recognize, though, is there's still merit to increase the lot size, simply because if you have a 60-foot wide lot, originally when the hillside was developed, it was 80-foot minimum lots. The 2003 comes in and reduces it by 20 feet to 60 foot. If you have a 60-foot wide lot on a hillside, you're going to have extensive retaining just to get the house and the driveway in for every lot. And so we still think there's merit to try to achieve this balance between too narrow of a lot, having to retain everything just to build on the property, and too large of a lot where multiple retaining systems. And I did throw in a picture just for gee whiz, for lack of better terms. This is that double lot. You can see multiple retaining systems. The front yard area has the rock and the decorative, and then the lot next door that they have these big engineered concrete tier systems going on. And in the end, that's what the DRC is struggling with, is that too large, and the ability to put in these retaining systems and still meet the cut and fill standards. There's a lot of tension going on in preserving hill slopes. So all in all, we probably need to go back and relook at the hillside in its holistic view, add in the geologic components in a better way. But the petition is the existing ordinance changing the lot frontage widths. And we looked around in the subdivision in this area in particular, because it was built back during the 80-foot minimum lots, and guess what most of the subdivisions of that area are built at? 80, 90 feet. That's the predominant lot width. So the city engineer said, yes, I think once we go above 10%, let's increase the lot width. His concern is that the 2-foot increment is really irrelevant from a design standpoint, although it seems fair in a ratio standpoint. His view is in these hillsides, we also construct roads, and our standard is not to go above 12% for a road for plowing, but for short distances, the city engineering specs and codes allow you to go to 15%. So his cutoff point was 15%. He said anything above 15% starts getting a little bit difficult. And so he's changed his recommendation, and it's supported in the staff recommendation, is leave the 0 to 10% to the standard base zone, except for the agricultural zone. Move the above 10% and above to 15, and he said, well, you could go cap it at 10 or under 10. You decide where the line is, greater than 10 or at 10, but cap it at 15% for your lot width for the 80-foot. And then he felt comfortable leaving the 100-foot in place until we re-review, because once you get above 15% grade, you're dealing in his mind in a different element of slope. And so maintain the 100 for that. So the amendment that we're plugging in is the 80-foot for a middle increment of 10 to 15. That's our recommendation to the commission.
Thank you, staff. Questions for staff? Since this, we've got the applicant here. Would you like to come and speak to this? Please.
I guess do you have questions for me?
Your comments to the staff report first, perhaps.
Chad Morris, resident of Centerville. In going over this and reviewing this, I was looking at kind of the same thing Corey did and the staff, that really a lot of times if you've got a lot that is 100 feet wide, just in terms of value, the price of it's going to go up. So if I looking at it in sense of as real estate itself, if you're capping something at 100, or as in you're forcing everything to be 100 feet, just like in Fort Canyon, not that I'm saying Fort Canyon is bad, but you're designating what kind of home is going to be there right away, because the value of the lot is most likely, unless it's a crazy slope, it's going to be a lot more expensive. In fact, I was kind of looking at this lot in terms of if I had to do the 100-foot lots, and obviously we were looking at it. Would I even be able to get 4 lots? I don't know if I would. It was kind of a matter of interpretation as to how you interpret different codes and whatnot. But if I weren't, that would put the 3 lots. It would give me 3 lots, and obviously the value of those, in my opinion, I'd probably be asking a lot more. Not that it would make up any type of difference, but it would definitely make it so what you can say is more of a lower end home now would not be affordable there because the lot values go up drastically. So I guess and I think Corey's picture in Fort Canyon did show that the wider you're getting, the more house you're going to put there, because the more the property is. So in my opinion, if we were to be able to reduce that to 80 feet, it not only allows for a more desirable neighborhood where you don't have all the different grading or different retaining, which is also in what I'm gathering, the reason for the code zoning ordinance of the hillside is to try to maintain the beautification of the hillside. But it also, reducing that to a smaller amount of frontage also gives more of an opportunity for people to construct a home, and of different values, rather than needing to be a 700,000 plus home. So that is I mean, obviously I feel that this lot over an acre does fit what I'm looking to do, as you can tell, but the map is not, I guess, what we're trying to review here. It's more the frontage. I'm meaning the site plan that I'm trying to review, but I do feel like it would be helpful for all of the hillside to approve this new zoning ordinance. So thank you. Thank you for hearing me out.
Sure, thank you. Questions for the applicant? Okay, thanks. This matter's been scheduled for a public hearing. Anyone else would like to stand up and talk? You want to talk again? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank you for that comment, and we'll turn it back over to the commissioners. Any further questions for staff? I guess when I first looked at the petition and looked at the incremental steps, I really didn't contemplate the issue with the retainage. It seems logical to have a scale, I guess, from a theoretical standpoint, but as I take it from your comments, Corey, the development committee just didn't feel like that was a very workable solution given the other factors that are looked at, right?
Yeah, we're looking, I mean, the fairness issue, I mean, it seems logical, an increment for whatever percentage it should go up. But example is, you know, here you're looking at, you know, 14%, and you're bouncing between 68 and 70. That may work, and not have to have the narrow lot retainage like a 60-foot lot would generate. But it was the issue of understanding the ordinance, explaining the ordinance, being able to track and enforce the ordinance, and really the city engineer said my cutoff is at 15%. If he came back and said the cutoff's at 20, I think we could have a different change, you know, maybe a little bit different, better ratio. But if you're just going from 10 to 15%, and he feels that the 15% is a potential problem, it was easier for our standpoint to say, okay, the increment will just move in 3 categories like the language of the ordinance says, but it'll now say 3 categories of slope, 2 ranges, which the default was 100, to 3 ranges matching the 3 categories, but cutting it off at 15. The engineer just felt like that's just the reasonable place that he draw a line. He was pretty uncomfortable going above 15%. That was where he drew his line on his recommendation. So narrowing that up just felt like just go to the 80 feet, balance it with the 80 feet.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? The chair will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion for the Planning Commission to recommend to the City Council to approve the proposed Hillside Overlay amendment as modified in the staff report with suggested reasons for action A through E.
Motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just I know Lisa sent me an afternoon email. There's just some formatting of the language that she'd like to
Would you like to share?
change.
Change in
Is that the
format?
red line that's in ours? Is that?
No, this is Mart red line. She's
Okay.
gonna,
No, they're not really substantive. So I just wanted to change where it says shall be platted with a minimum lot width. I just wanted that to say it shall require a minimum lot width, because we may have a parcel. I don't want someone to think, oh, if it's existing, it doesn't have to meet this. Because they would argue I'm not platting it. So
Right.
it just requires rather than plat.
I think that's,
That's a good change.
Good idea.
Yeah, great change.
So
Your
that's
motion- your motion,
acceptable
Reverend.
in my motion.
Okay. Been moved and seconded. Any further debate?
Yeah, Corey, as I was reading this and trying to wrap my head around it, sometimes I get a little worried. This is kind of an explanation of my vote and a little advice to Corey. I hope this is the appropriate place to share it.
Please.
I was trying to imagine what could be an unintended consequence of this. You know, I'm trying to imagine how a engineer's going to look at this. You know, is it going to encourage them to try to, if they have a development, kind of affect the slope or do grading in a way that that could make some sort of Pandora's box in another way. I'm sure you've kind of done that analysis, and as I kind of tried to do that in my head, I couldn't think of anything that I thought was opening up something super ugly, and I just thought I am inclined to vote for this. I like the idea of more flexibility here, but as you take it to the council, I guess I'd encourage you to kind of keep thinking of, put your head in the mind of an evil developer and try to figure out what they might try to do with that, and just because slopes can be really sketchy, and the last thing I'd want is Centerville City and hot water for slopes. But.
yeah, and understood. That's why I think we put in our recommendation to you that we said the DRC does not believe the proposed amendment adds further problems at present the way the ordinance is constructed. We still have a concern in the upgrade because it's not defined how you treat a slope. A slope perpendicular is different than a slope running, and there's not a good definitive way of our ordinance even addressing that. And so, that's where our engineer said, I just really get uncomfortable when we reach the 15% until we can get better parameters in place to define how it's going to be measured. And so that's why we said no further problems at this present time. That there's problems in the ordinance in its inherent old version and view, but at the present time, it's not going to change what somebody would significantly try to do under the present parameters.
Thank you, Corey. Any other debate?
I was similarly like Logan a little bit, you know, when we originally talked about this, I thought this is a great idea to have some sort of, you know, slope changed according to the increments of how, or change based on the increments of the slope. And then as I was reading it and the concerns that were raised from the city engineer, I was starting to get a little bit nervous too, that are we jumping this and not really fully looking at it in a way that is going to make sure that we're not opening a Pandora's box. So I guess I would just ask Corey, like he was unhappy with going over 15%, but was he comfortable going up to 15%? Like, was there any sort of cajoling on your end, or was he really just fine with this?
Well, I bought him breakfast in the morning when we were talking about, no.
Because I want to make sure.
Complete joke. No, he was comfortable with the 15 because that's a slope area that they deal with roads.
Okay.
And so because that's where his line was, is on the road issues, I'm
Okay.
comfortable with this because I can keep the roads in a subdivision in a 15%
That'd be fine.
for a short distance and be fine and work through that. It's above the 15% where he was
that's
not
tricky.
comfortable at all. So I think his is I'm fine to 15%. Above that makes me in a place that I'm not sure about.
Okay. That helps. I think that's a little more clear for me.
So Corey, though, let's go back to what you talked about just a second ago about slopes, perpendicular versus running. So the way I understand it then is the Hillside Overlay doesn't really talk about that. It just says, and especially what's in this motion here, it just says in a slope area.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter whether it's going this way or that way
Correct.
or the other way. But maybe that's kind of the Pandora's box that Logan is talking about, but is now the right time to talk about something like that, to say that? Because if you got a road that runs perpendicular across the slope, it could be perfectly level, right? And then you got the backyard might do something like that, pretty good slope.
That's definitely talked about. We currently in the ordinances, when we deal with that situation where you have a flat spot and a large hill, we also have the parameter that you have to have 5,000 square foot of contiguous build area under a certain percentage. So they have to search for the flat spot to put the lot and the pad in. We have the restriction of the road, so that leaves the default that something that's 30% ends up not utilized. So we don't feel uncomfortable with that parameter because that parameter sits inherent in the ordinance. We actually think there's a penalty in not putting the definition of slope because this is a slope perpendicular or with grade, and it actually hurts the developer with the grade coming down where they could easily build a driveway up, but you're over 10%. So we get you, so there's no flexibility. So we actually think that there'll be potentially in the future greater flexibility in aligning the roads and the lots when we define which way you measure the slope. But right now it's conservative. If you're just 0.1 above, doesn't matter whether it's cross slope, where the cut would be, or verse, you just can travel up. Because you could travel up a driveway at 12%, but your lot's going to be 80 foot regardless in this. So you're actually, maybe this is more conservative. Is it just says holistically any slope is categorized in this.
So again, though, going back to, part of me is thinking about, there's a couple of lots near where I live, just, it's a new, I think, is it Symphony that's building these, just below, well, my kids call it, we always call it Chicken Ridge, right? Below Island View Drive, and used to be an orchard there. Anyway, there's two lots there that there's a nice big flat buildable area, but the backyards of these would be a pretty significant slope up to what is Island View Drive, right?
Right, that's Island View B.
Yeah.
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 And it used to have a road that went through it at the bottom of the hill, and now you have the two knuckles that come into
Yeah.
play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they vacated the road and used the road area for where the homes would go.
Right, so in that case there's a large buildable area. You're approaching the home's gonna sit on a pretty flat spot, but the backyard is gonna be, I don't know what the slope is. It's pretty steep, right?
Yeah,
So-
it actually has a fault line running through the area, so you have a
Yeah, that-
50-foot setback from it.
Okay, that's something else, but.
Yeah.
But I mean, in that case, do we require 100-foot frontage for that, just because the backyard, which is,
Well, yeah, the issue will be is if the lot was, let's pretend where the fault line is near the bottom of the hill there. That's where the fault line is. And the old road that used to be platted through there becomes the build area for these lots. But let's just pretend that the road was in place again under new development. Because this Island View B was done back in the, I think it was.
probably in the 50s or 60s.
Yeah, I was gonna say about 50s, late 50s is what I recall. Under the hillside, we wouldn't accept the road at the base of the hill and two lots up that because they're over 30% and have a geologic hazard. So in theory, applying this particular overlay, Island View got away with something because it was precursor to this hillside overlay, because it did have two lots that sat up on that hill slope, but it was over 30% grade. That's why they even came in and said the engineering and design of this home, we need to vacate the road and put these on them and find a flat spot. But we would not have initially approved those lots in that configuration because the slopes were just too steep, couldn't find the 5,000 square feet that's under the 30% grade. There's a little cove canyon that flattens out right where the drainage, where it washes, but that's not 5,000 square feet. It's just, those lots would not be in the configuration that they are today under the hillside.
Are you talking like 800 south?
Yeah.
About eight?
Between 800 and 850 south,
Yeah,
just below 850 east, and
yeah,
yeah, so there's on the hillside,
on
Yeah.
that corner part.
yeah, the two knuckles that Corey's talking about, there's a lot on each one of those knuckles.
Yeah, and they vacated the road, that was just the economics for them.
But see,
To
part
do
of where I'm going is that this might be an example of where you've got a pretty large flat buildable area that's otherwise a normal lot, and then the backyard has a pretty steep slope to it, so it,
I've had a time recognizing where I am on the
You need to-
map.
That map's hard to tell.
so go south, Corey,
Yeah.
right?
There.
There.
Right there. Those two, and they're in the hillside overlay because, see the,
Yeah. If you seen the plat, the way it was originally built, these roads connected these two knuckles. This was a through road. And this is the steep slope, very steep slope. And just the economics of building on, they could have built on those steep slopes. They would have just had to really engineer and retain. And the economics at the time, the person who purchased the property said, look, this doesn't make sense. Can I just vacate this road and put the homes down on the flat part?
so part of my point here is, and I don't know that you could really reconfigure this any differently, but that northern lot, yeah, that one up there, because it's got part of it that is on that pretty steep slope, are we essentially going to require that it has a 100-foot frontage instead of something smaller, even though the bulk of the buildable area, the bulk of the lot is really a flat?
Yeah, under the ordinance, this would be the 100 feet regardless. They would just do the 100 feet with the 5,000 down on the flat.
But an owner could buy it, subdivide it into two pieces, and
Try to figure out whether they have enough area to do that, but they wouldn't because it's the 5,000 contiguous square feet of build pad that will govern how it gets placed.
Yeah, that's a big lot, though. You could do it there, but anyway, that was just a thought that I had as far as, kind of the backyard might penalize you unnecessarily.
The answer with the ordinance is yes. If you had a large piece of property and most of it was the slope and you had this great little piece that could fit two lots, but the whole grade is, you'd be penalized to the 100 feet.
But this ordinance is actually helping that situation and remedying it.
Well, you're right, it does, anyway, so are we going to for sure come back to the hillside thing and try and kind of fine tune this even more?
The answer is yes. The level of commitment to this versus all the other things that we do, I'd say it's going to be a little bit of time. We are behind. We comply with the state ordinance because we have a geologic hazard ordinance, but we're behind on modernizing that and updating it with the information that we should be. And that's what needs to be updated.
Should be on the list for next year.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments, debate? If not, let's vote. Commissioner Helgeson?
Aye.
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 Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, on your business item 2, if I may address that real quick. The City Council tabled action on the use change for Catering Limited on Main Street. And he had wanted to pay and jump the gun to see if he could get on an agenda. In the last council meeting, the council tabled this matter till November 8th. So therefore, this was all noticed and set forward. So officially, I don't know, maybe consult with Lisa at this point in time. Do we table it or do we just cancel it and renotice it for another day? Because tabling means usually to the next agenda, and I have no idea
What they're going to do.
what the decision's going to
Do
be.
you know what their hang-up is, City Council's?
Roughly, just, cart before the horse. We have Main Street issues. We're meeting on that on the 15th. They wanted time to think about it rather than the pressure of in the moment of the meeting, and just decide, is this something we feel comfortable moving forward, knowing that we're going to further address Main Street, or is this something that we should sit back on and wait till we address the issues on Main Street?
Well, the code text amendment is scheduled for the next city council meeting on November 8th, so I would suggest that you table this to the November 15th meeting. If they don't handle it on the 8th or it's denied, then, we can take it off or they can withdraw, but at least we have it scheduled so the applicant's still in the queue.
Good point.
Good idea.
I hereby move that we table this item till the November, what date?
15th.
15th Planning Commission meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Let's table. Thank you. Okay. Move to item 3. Discussion of possible amendments to the CZC 1248 South Main Street Corridor Overlay Zone. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request of the commission. You have an upcoming work session. The council has gone through, they're having a work session on the moderate income housing report that's due at the end of the year on November 8th. That's what they've scheduled for a work session. I think we talked about potentially November 8th, but that's their council meeting because of the election, and the city manager and mayor decided that this moderate income housing report due at the end of the year was something that they needed to address early, because in addressing it, if there's any changes, we would need to begin that process with the commission for any changes to the moderate income housing element. Just for you, FYI for you, moderate income housing elements to be reviewed every second year, and you have to update your projections, then look at your element, decide if your strategies or something else needs to change, and submit a report to the Department of Workforce Services. So they're scheduling the 8th for their work session on that, so we can bring them up to speed on what's in that element. So the work session has been scheduled tentatively for your meeting of the 15th? 15th, prior to your meeting, and the city council will attend that with you to talk about Main Street. If you recall, way back a couple of meetings ago, both bodies wanted to get together and discuss Main Street. At the request of the commission, you didn't want to enter into that work session without some concepts that was asked of staff, and that was the put a skeleton review of the design guidelines together, something to discuss. I don't know how much this is a skeleton or not. I'll let you decide that. But I felt comfortable that we could get mostly ideas to you so that you could be better prepared for the city council meeting. I don't intend to walk you through this, maybe answer some questions for you. But one thing I said, I don't know if it was too honest. I have a tendency to become too honest with the council, and said during the cut bop, you know, we're throwing darts. Staff just doesn't really know at this point in time. People along Main Street come to us with needs. We don't really know the direction. I mean, we can give them the policy, but we also know and have to upfront say that policy's in flux and potentially is changing. So we don't really know the final outcome. And because they have a right to petition, you know, we've had the construction sales and service come before you. We've had the catering limited come before you. People come to us with needs. We're not really sure what to say to them. So I compared it to throwing darts. Just throw a dart, see if it sticks, and see where we go from there. Sounds a little rude, but at the same time, it's the reality of it is we're in this in between. And when you're when you don't have a place to aim, everybody's getting uncomfortable. And that's,
Remind me what they did with construction. They said they
No.
denied.
yeah, they turned it down. So when you don't know where you're aiming, everybody gets in panic, and we just don't know what to do. So I feel the same about these design guidelines. I don't want you to feel that I'm married to them and think that this is the way Main Street should go, because I really think it's a community decision. So what I did, the best of my ability, to create this skeleton, because we are thinking about it would be something like Parish Lane design guidelines, drafting something around what those potential design guidelines could be. Setting aside the layout I proposed to you, I really do want to emphasize, if we don't know what we're doing with Main Street for uses and other elements, it's really hard to draft design guidelines, and you'll see that in the report. I propose a residential component option in the design guidelines. What I've done, and I've tried to provide a picture to you, is just try to wrap my mind around past discussions. You know, the Main Street, the form-based code was something that was looked upon as a positive for a long time, but because of uses and intensities, drew some negative ire. Also, as we looked at the public space plan, I think the public space plan as a whole, people wanted something better. Tell us what it is. The intensity of that public space plan became a center of conflict again. And so I did approach this from saying, and I think it was mentioned in the last work session with the council, we do like some of the things in the Main Street plan. We don't want to holistically throw it completely away. So in some ways, moving from a form-based code to a performance standard with design guidelines, I did try to bring and be respectful. You see the Matt's Place, the only place that did develop under the Main Street design guidelines. Tried to be respectful of that without being rigid to that element. Tried to salvage some of the form-based code concepts in the design guidelines, but be more flexible. I also looked at the use list, and I provided that at the end. It was a strong amendment to add single-family residential into Main Street. This was driven by Michael's Garage. Michael's passed away, unfortunately, recently, and so there is a new owner looking to take over and handle the Main Street Garage. But if you look at the house on the right, it used to be the old green, I think it was green colored, and now it's this tan color. Michael was the one that was really a proponent during the Main Street design guidelines of saying, hey, I'd like to buy that house and remodel it, but it's non-conforming, and all the parameters that go with it just it makes it investing in it not really worthwhile. So there were several proponents to say, hey, back in 2008 when we were doing some amendments, let's add single family into this Main Street plan. That's how single family even became allowable in the Main Street. And so I've spun off of that and said, are we really doing away with residential on Main Street? Discussions with individuals. You know, there's others that don't dream as big as the Main Street plan. Sleepy little town, sleepy little commercial, let's leave it that way, we really like it. And I'm not sure that that's a bad thing if it's the way you want to choose it.
We don't live in a sleepy little town, though. We're Centerville.
And so that, you know, there's resistance to the change, you know, to that. But I also hear and this is just my viewpoint, you know, what's wrong with some low level intensity residential? We already have the Turnblooms that live along Main Street, own a couple of houses there. Discussions are, as the fire department, if it really locates where it's planning to go to the O'Brien Glass, you know, predominantly locating on that northern half to almost 2/3, what's the rest of the property? You know, the question becomes is no being insensitive to the fire department, but there's a branding that goes with fire department. Red trucks, lights, sirens. Who wants to live next to that? Even though I know you can put protocols in, don't turn on your sirens at 3 o'clock in the morning till you're out on the main street and going somewhere. But then you got the new guy that comes on and flips the switch at 3 a.m. in the morning and does it anyway, and then we get a complaint. But what's the rest of the property? Is it large enough for commercial now? Would it hurt to put single family? Would probably be difficult. There's a new single family dwelling being built behind the proposed site, and that owner, when found out that the fire station was being built, was like, whoa, I don't know if that's my favorite thing after a $500,000 single family home site. You know, so will single family go there? But, you know, single family does expect more protections in multifamily. So would maybe a triplex be okay on that corner instead of a commercial?
Does the developer know that he's building right next to a commercial property?
Well, the Brighton Homes had bought that piece of property and sold it on the market after they were turned down with the O'Brien, and did not know the fire station was proposed for that site, because he bought the property well before the fire station looked at that property. So the answer is I don't know. It still feels like darts to me. It still feels like I don't know where to aim for these design guidelines. So what I did is I said, okay, we still want a corridor, but it's not one that we're going to be believing that it's the tourist town and the bistros. This is what I brought up with the council, the microbreweries, things of that element that are lifestyle. You know, from us as planners, your downtowns are not your retail centers anymore unless you have a big anchor. It really is lifestyle. It's your gyms, your bistros, you know, the things that people need, your salons, obviously your dentists. I don't know how many more we need here, but we have a lot, and we welcome them if the more want to come in. I don't want to run them away. But it is these lifestyle needs that will happen here. And because we have such a limited use of that on Main Street is why I think we're not really getting any synergy, because those lifestyle uses are not necessarily what everybody wants on Main Street. So we have to decide that. So setting aside that that's a very, very, very important decision, I drafted a skeleton, and I used the Michaels garage. Car repair is not allowed right now. But if Michaels went away, it's another place that people would feel sad. If Cutler's went away, it's another place that people would feel sad. These are uses that we're not allowing right now, so it perplexes me that we resist them in one side, but we like them on another side, and we don't know which one we're going to decide on. But it is a little place, and I've been in there, and the cars that Mike used to just repair were awesome, and his specialty. But he bought the house, and he fixed it up, and you have the other house, the White House, set back just back off the road. So the idea for me was this is a corridor, so the landscape setbacks are important in the corridor. But instead of having setbacks that are 20, 30, 40 feet, and bunt a lot of landscaping, I do get comments that Parish Lane is a nice corridor with the berms. Yeah, it's very suburban looking, but it is a nice corridor with the berms and the designs that are happening there. Well, this quaints that a little bit. Instead of a 30-foot, 20 and 30-foot that the parish lane's trying to achieve to, you know, I picked 12. Don't ask me why, it was just 12. Because I'm trying to respect buildings coming up to the street and not get 80 feet back by the time we get a little bit of parking there. So I think it was 12 there, 8 on the roads, but I really set the design guidelines around that landscaping. The public sidewalk, the symmetry that was last decided. I really do set that this public space and this first set of landscaping is the icon of the corridor. It's very iconic, and so there's a heavy emphasis on that icon. Everywhere from a cheaper version of how to do concrete and make it look nice instead of the cobblestone and the bricks and the expensive. You can do normal concrete work, and it's very easy to put in the borders, the brooming techniques, that can be done much, much cheaper than that other intensive plan. And so I spent time trying to describe that. I also introduced the public space plan back into the design guidelines. That doesn't mean a developer will be doing it all, but it is put the city that this is our public space. We talked about the commission wanting the bike lanes in the memorandum the commission sent to have those bike lanes installed. So we talk about narrowing up the median, but maintaining it for the left turns into the neighborhood. Narrowing up the travel lanes just enough so that we can get the bike lanes in place. The park strips are small, but preserving them because we are kind of more on a corridor. So I think that's a place you can think about. What's that 4-foot park strip really intended to be? Urbanized with a sidewalk, or something quaint that's a nice little park strip, but not weeds, obviously. Utility lines, tried to create something creative around that. Street signing, traffic management signing. I went as far as saying, you know, reduce the number of poles over time, because they could put some bigger system poles in, so you don't have so many poles. But I went the core 10. If they go the core 10 rather than the galvanized look or the powder coat, you know, the things we see is the galvanized, you know, it weathers bad and looks terrible. The powder coat looks good for a while till it chips, and then you're painting it over with paint and it has all the chip marks into it. The core 10 rusts nice and not evenly, but you know, it looks kind of quaint like a wood pole.
What's the core 10?
If you go out west and you see right along 1250 West, the big, huge power poles that turn corners.
Okay.
They're massive. It's that type of steel. It's called core 10 steel. Very thick, but it will weather into a rust and be similar to the wood poles, but you could get a substantial carrying capacity out of those versus the wood poles. I don't know how feasible that is. We know that taking down the poles and burying them is $10 million, so that's not an option. Well, I guess it could be, but I'll let you and everybody else decide funding that project.
Well, and then all of the residents came together to buy all those flags.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, I mean, we are not a sleepy town, but we are a small town.
Right.
And those flags make us feel.
You could still have light poles with flags.
Yes,
Yeah,
sure.
and that's why I say we still preserve understanding utility lines are going to be there, but I also put in that we might do some poles across the street over and match where you can create some semblance of symmetry using the banners and the so forth to celebrate the community. So I'm interjecting the public space plan into the design guidelines. Don't know if that's the right place. It was just good to plug it in. The corridor is built around that framework of the street and that public space plan and travel and that 12 feet of landscaping and signing. And that's really that corridor design. Now the place that's probably where I'm even a bit uncomfortable is I'm trying to respect what I heard is that we do want to move buildings not being 70 feet back in huge parking lots. So if you think of Michael's Garage, if you think of Ann Fidel's insurance office there with the short parking lots, commercial uses, if they're going to go in and it's not walkable, they do like some front door parking. That's a sacred place for them. Whether we like it or not, that's sacred to them. So I'm saying keep some parking, but not all of it. So I go back to the form-based code and say, bring your buildings to the street. The first place we look for the additions is bringing it to the street, because we're going to say 1 row or 2 rows of parking and a drive aisle. I went to the 1, you go 2, but if you think of 2 19-foot, so 20-foot parking aisles and a 25-foot drive lane, you're back to nearly the 7-Eleven setback. So 1 row of parking in your drive lanes, still keep the form-based code that if you have side yard parking, it's not next to somebody else's side yard parking. The purpose of that is to bring the buildings so that you don't space the buildings out too far from each other. So it's still a form-based principle. Obviously, parking behind, awesome, yeah, in the designs. The materials, trying to be respectful. We had design materials, but instead of saying it's a main street where everybody's walking and shopping into the cove and we want 12 inches maximum to the front door of your entrance, and we want an entrance every 50 feet, relax that way back and say, still want good design to your buildings. We still want public access, like the Paris Lane Design Guidelines say, even in there, to your front doors. We still want that, but it'll just be less intensive if we do that.
So with the public space plan, did you say you incorporated parts of the Parish Lane Design Guidelines, or did you just
my own
public
custom
space?
version. Okay. It should be
similar to.
Yeah, but it's quite a bit different than the Parish Lane. It's really customized to Main Street the best way I could begin to frame it. The other thing I throw in is the residential. You have this awkwardness when residential is right next to the commercial lot, but I think it could be workable. I think residential could be used to fill in the gaps if the market seems to be right. And I'm thinking the corner of Porter and Main, if the fire station goes in, is it really going to be a new commercial building there? Or is there a low level of multifamily that's acceptable and it could be adjacent? Because multifamily, yeah, they'll complain about the sirens, but the reality of it is multifamily is always used as a buffer. So it's part of the lifestyle of multifamily. You get a little bit of buffer, but you're still living next to commercial. And still, if you want to leave the single family in, we certainly can do that. And so then you have this relationship that I'm trying to build. I think but the awkward part that I'm talking about is, are we really think that we can get additions to the building to minimize the distance? I think we can to some degree, but that's back to probably the most difficult part of the ordinance is that the first place this ordinance is saying is, when you come in, we want you to have the short parking lot. And our first place you want to adapt, is to add out front. So think of the old fire station. Probably workable to add through that apron something to the building. The 7-Eleven that's been divided up into 2 tenant spaces. You got the hair salon and whatever might be there, / limited catering. I don't know. I think that's probably a little tougher. So you see the section nonconformities that I wrote in there, unwritten? I don't know. How do we recognize rights of nonconformities, but not open it up so that you can expand 30% without having to come up to the shorter parking lot? That's yet to be determined. So sorry for the length of description, but I was just throwing a dart, trying to use a format that I see on Main Street, preserve elements of the form-based code, but convert everything into more of a corridor plan. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it till you tell me to change it, because right now I don't know what else to write.
Thank you, Corey. Comments?
Well, I like how you incorporated a lot of the elements that were usable from the Main Street plan, I think, to a degree, and allowing flexibility with some of those same things, but also looked at reality and was really pragmatic. I think this is a really pragmatic approach, so I appreciate that. I am concerned, my main concern with scrapping the plan in the first place, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the South Main Street plan was the right way to go, but my main concern is I don't want to be guilty of devaluing land or property of someone's property that just because we want to. Just because we want to have residential someplace, we just suddenly devalue someone's land for that to happen. And I think that's an issue that we're finding coming a lot to us. We found that same issue at Pages Lane when we were talking about what do we want to do with Old Dix and what can we make work there. And they said, hey, this is the value of our land. We want to get the value of it. And I recognize there's a pull and a tug between what is usable for a land and what's marketable for the land, and also, you know, what someone thinks is the value of a land, of their property. So I just really want to be sensitive to that. I want to be sensitive that we are recognizing property rights and recognizing valuation, and not ever in any sort of attempt to appease some concerns from people that were devaluing land. But like I said, I do appreciate that it's a very pragmatic approach, and I liked that. Can you tell me one more time about the light poles on 1350? I tried to find it and I can't see an example of it.
Before we jump to that, could I ask you a question
Yeah.
on what you just said, and maybe some clarification? We're not really contemplating, I mean, what we're really talking about here is doing away with the form-based over
Right.
This
the plan,
overlay.
the overlay,
South Main Street.
and we're not changing the zoning.
No.
So when you're talking about devaluing, if you've got a commercial zone and somebody wants to come in and pay someone who has a commercial piece of property the value that that person is asking so that you can build your single-family residence,
They can still do that.
they can still do that.
That's true, and I agree with you on that, and I think that's a hypothetical. I'm just looking at, are we taking a step towards rezoning?
Well, and conceptually, are you keeping an overlay though? Because you have to have an area defined.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or-
this would simply,
This would amend the overlay.
yeah,
right?
this would take away the overlay and move the corridor from basically City Hall to Porter.
So chapter 1248 would be repealed
Right,
entirely?
and this would just be design guidelines to the CM zone on Main Street.
Right, but it would still be to the CM,
It would be to the CM zone.
right.
Now, the issue I think you bring up is if we convert, if the expectation is that we're converting it rather than a selective opportunity to put, let's say, a single family. Because I think that's what I'm trying to point out back here, is that if you revert to the CM zone, you're losing the overlay uses at the end of the document. These can be added back into the CM zone. That's not difficult. But just understand that the green, the restaurant eatery, the single family, these are all uses added because of the overlay. So if these are acceptable uses, they would need to be added somehow to make sure that the CM zone can capitalize on those uses if any of them are something you want to preserve. That's why I brought that up.
So those are currently permitted uses.
Permitted and conditional because of the overlay.
Yeah, so typically we regulate use through zoning,
Yeah.
not design guidelines.
Right, and so I did not write zoning into the design guidelines. I'm just bringing it up to say if you return to the CM and assign design guidelines to Main Street area, you know, it'll be CM zoned, but the design guidelines will sit as a part of from here to here, because Parish goes from Main to Legacy.
Right.
And you have different zonings along the way, mostly CVH, but you still have CH there. This would be, CM zone exists, and the area would be approximately City Hall to Porter as to be the area of the design guidelines. But if you did away with the overlay, I'm trying to point out that
Would
you're
lose
back to
those.
the CM zone uses, which are limited to begin with. That's part of the discussion of the eatery, or not the eatery, the
couple.
yeah, the cut bop, and these uses, because the single family was added at the request of Mike when he was wanting to buy that home, and the only way the single family was allowed is because of the overlay. And I think that's why it's important to understand that the desired uses is a place we need to achieve so that we can understand where that needs to take place, and then you can add the design guidelines in whatever manner that you want to that area and its uses.
Does the corner of Parish and Main fall in the Parish corridor? The gateway? Or why are you going to City Hall? Why aren't you going to Parish Lane?
Well, we could go to Parish Lane. I'm just saying, I've been riding them around to say, and this is a good question.
Because there's commercial up there on that corner.
Yeah, the issue is that the Dick's Market is not probably ripe for development. So I'm assuming at least the Dick's Market area that's part of the overlay right now disappears.
Right.
Whether we keep the two corners on the south side, I think that's a discussion. I've also assumed that the Pages Lane may go away. Now, this is the cart and the horse. You know, we're dealing with the Pages Lane and it's tabling, but the western half still is referencing the Pages Gateway of the overlay plan. So we're going to have to go back and rectify that, whatever the outcome is there. But really, I think most people, when they talk about Main Street, is Parish or City Hall to Porter, because the other is the residential boulevard, which even under the overlay, there wasn't any changes to that area. So but you're right, you could go further than City Hall and take the two south corners in. I just think going over to the Parish is probably, the north side of Parish is probably not feasible anymore.
I didn't mean to interrupt on your other question, though. You were going to ask
No,
about
you're
the
good.
polls?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Can you just show us an example of that?
Of poles on, oh,
1250?
I see, you're saying Google Earth, yeah. Let's go back out.
Yeah, what'd you call it, 10-4?
Yeah, 10-4.
So if Dick's Market and that area was taken out, I'm just gonna ask you some questions while you're getting there.
Where am I at?
Your farm.
What would that revert to for design guidelines and
Which area?
The new Dick's Market.
Dick's?
That would just revert back to the Parish Lane design guidelines in the CH zone that it's currently located in. Let's see, street view, hopefully they have it here.
Okay, south. I was going north, sorry. Those new ones.
That kind.
See, it's kind of that.
That's a large one, that's
Yeah.
taller than they would need.
But you're saying that that red rust color would kind of blend in with the wood better than would a steel or something?
Yeah, I think you can reduce the number of poles if that program ever came into being. You could work with Rocky Mountain Power, reduce the number of poles so they're not as frequent. But what would be the right, because these are structurally able to carry more than the wood poles would.
But we'd lose the uniqueness of leaning over Main Street, kind of.
Framing Main Street.
Like I
That's what
said-
we've been trying to do is
Like-
frame Main Street.
Like I
Some
said,
cities have trees, we
I'm
have
not
poles.
We
married
just
to
have
getting rid
poles.
of the utility poles. You want them, you can keep them.
One day, we're gonna have a really bad windstorm, and they're just like gonna knock a bunch out and just be like, oh, another really bad windstorm.
Yeah.
So I'm just doing the planning thing, thinking out long time
Okay.
down the road and
Okay.
saying these utility poles may go away. What would they be replaced with? How do we respond? What does our public space plan say about it?
Okay.
And I still put in the whimsical art. I know that was everybody's favorite, but you can
You
take the
loved
whimsical,
that.
you can take the whimsical art out if you want.
You loved that.
You know, and I appreciate all the work you've done on this, Corey, and I, you know, I guess I'm pretty much convinced now that the only thing we really can anticipate is for the market to dictate what goes on Main Street. And the only way we really control that is through design guidelines and the public space plan. And so you've achieved those elements. The one thing that isn't in here, which concerns me, just in the long-term perspective, is It's all fine and good to have these guidelines and so forth, but there's really no mechanism to enforce upkeep and you know, people you know, taking pride in their Main Street.
I see what you're saying.
And if you know, if you had the buildings, you know, framing the street like we had under the old form-based code, that sort of takes care of itself.
True.
Whereas with these setback properties, you may not have that same amount of control. And I don't know that there's any mechanism that would really allow us to get there, but that's something that, except in the public space, of course, and we can control the public space. So maybe that's the only thing we have going for us. So.
No, that's a good point, and depending on what your expectations are, whether it's enforcement programs, whether it's facade rehabilitation programs, I mean, those are all, you know, applicable, you know, terms, but you're correct. That's something that's not addressed.
And Dave, you feel like, oh, sorry, Corey.
Go ahead.
You feel like in the current plan, the current as is, because the public has control over so much space, that to a large extent resolves that concern. Am I understanding that right?
Well, just because
It's so visible.
it's so visible, I mean, it's
just
bringing
there.
the buildings
Oh, I
right
see.
up.
Yeah,
to the
it
street.
causes new construction really to, and so the longevity lasts longer because it causes a new construction.
It's like a pure pressure effect, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Healthy.
Kind of is. Other comments?
What's the pathway forward with these?
Well, I think that the purpose for asking Corey to do this was to give us something to study, to get an understanding of, and these are Corey's thoughts, obviously. If we have other things that we want to add to this or take out of it in preparation for our meeting with the city, I think that the idea was that we just wanted to have something in front of us that we could we could take the city that gave specific talking points.
And I think it gives you the skill set for dialogue. You know, again, this is not something I'm married to. I'm just trying to assemble everything I'm hearing and come up with the best thing that I could assemble in multiple, you know, conversations and experiences. And so I'm grasping at that, but you know, the tool is really to help you be able to see, okay, there is things that can be done, you know, whether this is it or not, but it prepares you to have those discussions with the council instead of, you know, we just look at each other and say, now what?
Now, this is our only CM zone, right?
This is our only CM zone currently.
So we do have some flexibility, and I really would hate to see really any of these permitted or conditional uses drop out of the scheme of
Agreed.
things, because I think we want to have that kind of flexibility on this.
Agreed.
And more,
And correct.
maybe.
Yeah, catering limited. I wondered if we could get that on the.
Auto repair,
Construction.
construction, you know, these are all decisions to make. You know, I tell this story just as a tangent. This is a funny one. Ann Fidel wanted to rent out some office space in her building. And a person came through that had just graduated from cosmetology. And she was excited to find her opening booth and get underway. And she applied for a business license and had no idea what was going on. And the business license come across my desk, and I had to be the really, really, really bad guy. Because the cosmetology technology is advanced, that the tattooing for eyeliner in your eyebrows and leaving lipsticks, this was going to be her niche, whatever you were supposed to call it. Under our definitions, that's a tattoo shop, and she couldn't come here, so she went to Bountiful.
It's defined as a tattoo shop? Wow.
So I'm not saying that's good or bad. That's a value judgment. But what I'm pointing out to is that this is what I would say creates the problem with Main Street. You know, is it an entrepreneurial for a person such as this graduating and wanting to do something? And unfortunately, the way the construct of the ordinance is, it lists her as a tattoo shop, you know, and I know the emotional reaction to a tattoo shop. When there is a labeling that goes on there, particularly depending on the number of tattoos and where they're placed. But at the same time, you know, we worry about odor from a restaurant. So we eliminate the odor of the restaurant, and we also eliminate the cosmetology opportunity for a person. And this is that difficult balance of trying to create, is it an entrepreneurial place? How broad or how narrow are we being in that mindset? You know, we're discussing of a mountain bike trail, you know, but, you know, bicycle shops, are they good? Are they bad? I mean, these are the things that we have to try to wrap our minds around. And I think that's probably the number one issue of Main Street is that we know how to react to stuff that makes us uncomfortable, but we don't know how to react and balance the needs of Main Street with the negatives that come along with being adjacent to Main Street. And that vision, that aiming, and then knowing where to go, that the planning is to provide us, is lacking. So hopefully you can get there. Or I have good job security for a while.
Yeah. I went to a conference today, and one of the speakers talked about Sandy City, and in 1983, which to me that doesn't sound that long ago, but for some of you it may. 1983, which is only 33 years ago, essentially Sandy City decided that they were going to be a bedroom community, and were going to basically stop any further commercial zoning or any additional densities. That's changed.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I don't know where we're going to be 33 years from now. 33 years ago, Centerville was a much different place. But because of the growth that we're looking at in the next 30 years along the Wasatch Front, essentially they're saying by 2050 our population could double. Mm-hmm. Doubling of the population means that there's going to be new opportunities for development everywhere, commercial and residential.
And the issue of infrastructure and infill and using that infrastructure to its capacity versus the sprawl is the tension that's going on with our area. Absolutely. It's changing quicker than I think any of us realize, and it's going to take some real intuition and understanding of the trends to do our planning going forward. And I think we need to look at Main Street as still a valuable corridor and a valuable entrance into this town, and whatever we can do to make it something that we're proud of and happy with going forward. We need to try to get there. So I'm looking forward to the work session. I'm looking forward to interacting with the City Council on this, because I know that some members of the City Council have some very strong feelings about this. So. Any other comments?
So Marcia sent us the email about did she send us an email? No. So when do we want to have the work session? The 9th, he said?
It's the 15th.
15th.
Sorry. Before your meeting, your regular meeting.
Okay, great. Perfect.
Any other comments before we move on? All right. Well, thank you again, Corey. Appreciate that very much. And hopefully all of us will be up to speed on this and be ready to discuss it. That brings us to the Development Director's report.
Yeah, just brought you up to speed with the work session for your meeting. Also, the council's report, as we mentioned, Catering Limited was tabled. The RM zone amendments were also tabled, and the Legacy Commons Development Project was tabled at their meeting to their November 8th. And so we'll see what their final decisions come out to be on those, hopefully.
Thank you. Let's review our minutes from last time. Let's go through these. It's relatively short. Any comments on page 1? Page 2? Page 3?
Mr. Chair, I move, or just kidding.
No, go ahead.
Go
I
ahead.
move that we accept the unamended minutes for
I like how you stated that.
the Wednesday, October 11, 2017 meeting.
I second.
Moved and seconded. Any debate? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Corey, we took your email really seriously.
We did. Okay, can I have a question? I guess I was unaware, I was thinking, we just talk about our meeting schedules. So we don't have one next week or the 8th.
Right, the election's on the 7th, so the council meeting is held on the 8th.
Great.
Which, back when we did your calendar, we bumped that to the 15th.
The 15th, and then we don't have anything on the 22nd because it's Thanksgiving.
Correct.
And then do we have something on the 29th?
No, you'll just have your first meeting in December, and then that will be your
The
last of the year.
6th? On
So
December?
typically, we only meet once
In
in
December.
November and once in December.
Right.
So
I remember we met once in November, but I couldn't remember what we did in December.
I
meeting
think
in
the
December.
December meeting's the 13th.
13th. Okay.
Be your second Wednesday of the month.
Right.
So, I am in Christmas Carol over at Center
Oh.
Point. And I always request Tuesday, Thursday, and they always put me on Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
And we messed you up because of the
So
election.
I was planning on all these different things so I could get my time off and everything. So I'm going to change that, but I will not be here on the December 6th.
Good.
We don't have a meeting on the
Nah,
6th.
13th.
13th.
That's what I meant to say.
Good, 'cause
I was looking at it
Will
not be
and I said the wrong one. So I won't be here on the 13th and I will have to change so that I can be here on the 15th. So,
That'd be great if you could. I unfortunately will not be here on the 15th. If I can arrange to call in, I will, but I'll have to let you know on that.
yeah, so I'm a maybe on that one right now.
Commissioner Hayman has agreed to chair that and will also be at the work session, however.
Great.
She's indicated she's cleared her schedule to be here, so hopefully we can all be here, and I will endeavor to get perhaps some comments to Commissioner Hayman that could be shared at the work session, if I can join. All right, anything else? Well, thank you all for your time and efforts tonight. Anyone like to move to adjourn?
Kevin, you've been wanting to say something all night.
Kevin?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.